A white police officer pepper sprays a young black boy, completely unaware of who the boy's father is. What happens next will leave you speechless. The sun shone brightly over the bustling neighborhood as Tyler, a young black boy, walked along the sidewalk. His backpack hung loosely over one shoulder, its worn straps swaying with each step he took. Tyler was in a cheerful mood, his mind focused on the games he planned to play with his friends at the park. Can you imagine a simple walk turning into a nightmare? Stay tuned to Adam Alpha to find out how this unfolds. The world around him seemed alive with movement, the laughter of children playing in a nearby yard, the hum of cars passing by, and the chatter of pedestrians going about their day. Tyler paid little attention to the activity around him, his thoughts preoccupied with the simple joys awaiting him. The park had always been his escape, a place where he could forget the stresses of the world and just be a kid. He adjusted his backpack slightly, his pace quickening as he imagined his friends already waiting by their favorite bench. Not far from where Tyler walked, a junior police officer stood inside a small convenience store, questioning the owner about a reported petty theft. The store owner claimed that a young person had taken items without paying, leaving abruptly before being caught. Another witness, attempting to be helpful, had provided a vague description, mentioning only that the alleged thief was a black boy wearing specific clothing. That description, though incomplete and lacking crucial details, was enough for the officer to make up his mind. His attention shifted entirely to the notion that any black child in the vicinity could be the suspect. He ignored the need for proper evidence, allowing his bias to cloud his judgment. At that moment, as Tyler passed by the shop, the officer glanced through the large glass window and spotted him. Tyler was oblivious to the scrutiny, his eyes scanning the horizon as he walked. The officer's gaze narrowed, locking onto the boy with a determination that had little to do with reason or fairness. The officer stepped out of the store, his demeanor immediately aggressive. Despite Tyler's clothing not matching the description given, the officer decided that he had found the culprit. To him, the mere fact that Tyler was a black boy near the shop was enough. He reached for the can of pepper spray on his belt, gripping it firmly as he approached the boy. Tyler noticed the officer only when he was a few steps away, confused by the man's intense focus on him. Tyler slowed his pace, unsure of what was happening. Before he could say a word, the officer raised the can and sprayed him directly in the face. The sharp sting of the spray hit Tyler instantly, blinding him as a searing pain spread across his eyes and face. He let out a startled cry, dropping his backpack to the ground as he stumbled backward. His hands flew to his face, trying desperately to wipe away the burning sensation, but the pain only intensified. His vision was blurred, his tears mixing with the residue of the spray, making it impossible to see. Tyler's mind raced as he struggled to make sense of what had just happened. He couldn't understand why the officer had attacked him or what he had done to deserve such treatment. Fear and confusion overwhelmed him as he stood there, clutching his face and gasping for breath. The officer showed no concern for the boy's condition. He stepped forward, grabbing Tyler roughly by the arm. Tyler flinched at the contact, his body trembling as he tried to pull away. His cries of protest were ignored as the officer tightened his grip, dragging the boy toward the patrol car parked nearby. Tyler's legs barely carried him as he was forced along, his mind consumed by panic and pain. He stumbled, his knees buckling slightly, but the officer didn't slow down. Instead, he yanked the boy forward, his actions cold and unfeeling. The bustling street around them seemed to fade into the background as Tyler's world narrowed to the unbearable sting in his eyes and the relentless grip of the officer. Passers-by glanced at the scene, some with curiosity and others with concern, but no one intervened. The officer's authority loomed too large, and Tyler's pleas were drowned out by the indifference of those around him. As the patrol car came into view, Tyler's heart sank further. He felt powerless, unable to understand how a simple walk to the park had turned into a nightmare. He tried once more to explain, his voice trembling as he insisted he had done nothing wrong, but the officer silenced him with a curt order to be quiet. The officer opened the car door and pushed Tyler inside, his movements rough and impatient. Tyler fell onto the seat, his hands still clutching his face as the burning sensation refused to subside. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing in his ears as he sat there, shaking and crying. The officer circled the car and climbed into the driver's seat, his expression unreadable. He glanced at Tyler through the rearview mirror, his eyes hard and devoid of sympathy. Without another word, he started the engine and drove toward the station, leaving Tyler's backpack abandoned on the sidewalk. As the car pulled away, Tyler leaned his head against the seat, his chest heaving with sobs. He couldn't see where they were going, and he didn't know what awaited him at the station. All he knew was that he was scared, confused, and alone. At the police station, the junior officer yanked Tyler out of the patrol car, gripping the boy's arm tightly as he led him through the front entrance. Tyler's face was a mess of redness and swelling, the aftermath of the pepper spray evident in the way he blinked furiously and stumbled forward. His vision was still blurred, his tears mixed with the residue on his skin, streaking his cheeks and making his discomfort all the more obvious. The officer didn't offer a word of comfort as he dragged the boy into the station. His pace was brisk and unrelenting, forcing Tyler to shuffle quickly to keep up. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the burning in his eyes and face made it nearly impossible for him to focus on where they were going. Once inside, the officer pushed open a heavy metal door that led to a small, dimly lit interrogation room. The walls were bare except for a clock ticking noisily above the door. A single chair sat in the center of the room, its metal legs slightly scuffed from years of use. The officer didn't bother easing Tyler into the space. Instead, he shoved him roughly into the chair, the boy landing awkwardly as his knees scraped against the edge of the seat. Tyler clutched at the armrests, his breaths coming in short, shallow gasps as the pain from the pepper spray continued to sting his skin. He barely had time to adjust to his surroundings before the officer returned with a wet cloth. Without warning, the man grabbed Tyler's chin and began scrubbing at his face with the cloth. The movements were rough and impatient, showing little regard for the boy's discomfort. The cloth, damp and cold, should have offered relief, but the officer's callous handling only added to Tyler's misery. The boy flinched as the fabric scraped against the tender skin around his eyes, and he tried to pull away. The officer tightened his grip on Tyler's chin, forcing him to remain still as he wiped at the residue with mechanical indifference. When the officer finally tossed the cloth onto the table with a loud thud, Tyler's face was still red and blotchy, though his vision was slightly clearer. His eyes continued to sting, and the lingering burn on his skin made every movement uncomfortable. The officer didn't give him a moment to recover. He immediately began the interrogation, his voice sharp and demanding as he leaned in close to Tyler. He started with a question that carried more accusation than inquiry, asking why Tyler had stolen from the shop. Tyler froze, his mind reeling. He opened his mouth to respond, but the officer didn't wait for an answer. He continued speaking, his tone growing more pointed as he berated the boy for his supposed actions. His words were laced with anger, each one landing like a verbal blow. He accused Tyler of being part of a larger problem, making sweeping generalizations about black people and blaming them for the deterioration of the neighborhood. The officer's remarks were cutting, filled with prejudice and disdain. He didn't seem interested in the truth. Instead, he appeared to relish the opportunity to vent his frustrations at someone who couldn't fight back. Tyler's voice trembled as he tried to explain himself through his tears. He protested that he hadn't stolen anything, that he was on his way to the park to meet his friends, and that he didn't even know what theft the man was referring to. His words came out in fragments, interrupted by the sobs that shook his small frame. The officer, however, dismissed Tyler's explanation as a lie. He waved a hand in frustration, cutting the boy off mid-sentence. His tone became more insistent as he pressed Tyler for answers, demanding that the boy admit to the crime. He leaned closer, his shadow falling over Tyler like a dark cloud, and continued to hurl accusations with growing intensity. What will happen when the truth is revealed? Don't miss the shocking twist coming up on Adam Alpha. Tyler shook his head vigorously, his tears falling faster as he pleaded with the officer to believe him. He insisted that he was telling the truth, that he hadn't stolen anything, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The officer's frustration mounted with each denial, and he began raising his voice, his accusations echoing off the walls of the small room. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier with each passing moment. Tyler's sobs filled the air, the sound raw and unrelenting as he struggled to defend himself. The officer, unmoved, continued to push him, his questions growing sharper and more pointed. He demanded to know why Tyler had taken the items and what he planned to do with them, his tone implying guilt even as the boy desperately maintained his innocence. The argument escalated further, with the officer pacing back and forth in front of the chair, his movements agitated and his voice carrying an edge of impatience. Tyler, still trembling, hunched over slightly, his hands gripping the edge of the chair as though it were the only thing keeping him grounded. The officer's words cut deeper with each repetition, his generalizations about black people growing more vicious. He accused Tyler of being just like the others he claimed were responsible for the decline of the community, painting the boy as part of a larger problem rather than an individual. The accusations felt relentless, a barrage of insults and assumptions that left Tyler feeling trapped and hopeless. No matter how many times Tyler insisted he was innocent, the officer refused to believe him. His mind was already made up, and he seemed determined to extract a confession from the boy, whether it was true or not. The more Tyler protested, the more aggressive the officer became, his frustration boiling over into outright hostility. The room felt suffocating, the tension palpable as the confrontation dragged on. Tyler's cries grew louder, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and the constant accusations only deepened his sense of despair. Despite his fear and confusion, Tyler continued to deny any wrongdoing. He clung to the truth, even as it seemed futile against the officer's unwavering conviction. Each denial was met with more anger, more accusations, and more disdain. The interrogation dragged on, the minutes feeling like hours as Tyler endured the officer's relentless questioning. The boy's tears soaked the front of his shirt, his small frame shaking with each sob. The officer, though visibly frustrated, showed no sign of letting up, his determination to paint Tyler as guilty overshadowing any concern for the truth. The room remained filled with the sounds of Tyler's sobs and the officer's sharp words, the air thick with tension and the weight of injustice. The interrogation room remained a scene of rising tension. Tyler sat slumped in the chair, his small frame trembling as sobs racked his body. His tear-streaked face was a mask of fear and confusion, his swollen eyes darting helplessly toward the officer who loomed over him. The junior officer continued pacing back and forth, his agitation growing with each denial from the boy. He had started raising his voice, repeating accusations that were no closer to the truth than when the interrogation began. As the officer barked questions at Tyler, demanding answers to crimes the boy had not committed, the sound of the door creaking open interrupted the heated exchange. The junior officer turned abruptly, his words faltering as a senior officer stepped into the room. The air shifted immediately. The senior officer paused just inside the doorway, his gaze falling on the boy seated in the chair. Tyler looked up at the sound of the door, his teary eyes meeting those of the newcomer. The senior officer's expression softened as concern flickered across his face. He took in the boy's disheveled appearance, the blotchy redness of his face, the lingering wetness of tears, and the defeated hunch of his shoulders. There was something familiar about the boy, a recognition stirring in his mind as he studied him further. The senior officer spoke gently, his tone a sharp contrast to the aggression that had filled the room moments earlier. He greeted Tyler with calmness, his words carrying an air of care. He asked how the boy was doing, his voice steady and reassuring. Tyler blinked, unsure how to respond. The soothing tone of the senior officer was jarring after the hostility he had endured. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the junior officer stepped forward, his tone shifting into one of triumph. The junior officer gestured toward Tyler, explaining the situation with what he assumed was a sense of authority. He began to recount how he had apprehended the boy, describing his supposed role as the culprit in the shop theft. His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed he had accomplished something significant. He gestured toward the boy as though presenting evidence, confident that his actions would be commended. The senior officer's face changed almost immediately. The moment the junior officer called Tyler a thief, confusion and doubt clouded his features. His brows knit together as he glanced back at the boy, a flicker of disbelief evident in his expression. Something wasn't adding up. He raised a hand to halt the junior officer's explanation, his tone firm but calm as he asked for clarification. He wanted to know exactly what the junior officer meant by calling the boy a thief. His question was direct, cutting through the junior officer's attempt to embellish the story further. The junior officer faltered for a moment but then repeated his accusation, pointing toward Tyler once more. He detailed how he had spotted the boy outside the shop and how his actions were supposedly suspicious enough to warrant immediate apprehension. His voice grew more insistent as he laid out his version of events, clearly expecting the senior officer to agree with his judgment. But as the junior officer spoke, the senior officer's eyes widened in shock. The realization dawned on him as he pieced together what was happening. The familiarity he had felt upon first seeing Tyler now clicked into place, and his expression shifted from confusion to certainty. The senior officer shook his head firmly, cutting the junior officer off mid-sentence. He corrected him without hesitation, his voice leaving no room for argument. Tyler wasn't a thief, he explained. He wasn't involved in the theft at all. The senior officer's next words landed like a thunderclap in the small room. Tyler was the son of the police chief. The weight of those words hit the junior officer like a brick wall. His confident demeanor crumbled instantly, replaced by visible panic. His face paled as the gravity of his mistake became clear. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He stammered incoherently, his earlier bravado replaced with fear. The room, once filled with the junior officer's relentless accusations and Tyler's tearful protests, now fell into an uneasy silence. The junior officer glanced back at Tyler, his gaze no longer one of authority but of desperation. The boy, still trembling in his chair, looked up at the two officers, his tear-streaked face a mixture of confusion and exhaustion. The junior officer's mind raced as he tried to process what he had just heard. He replayed his actions over the past hour, the pepper spray, the rough handling, the accusations, and the complete disregard for the boy's denials. Each memory now filled him with dread as he realized the full extent of his error. He had not only mistreated a child but had done so to the son of the most powerful figure in their precinct. Desperation took hold of the junior officer as he struggled to think of a way to salvage the situation. His earlier confidence, rooted in prejudice and authority, now felt like quicksand beneath his feet. He glanced nervously at the senior officer, searching for any sign of leniency, but the firm set of the senior officer's jaw told him that none would be forthcoming. The senior officer turned back to Tyler, his expression softening once more. He addressed the boy gently, his words a stark contrast to the junior officer's earlier interrogation. Tyler, still overwhelmed by the events of the day, could only nod weakly in response. The room remained heavy with tension as the realization of what had happened settled over everyone present. The junior officer stood frozen, his earlier actions now replaying in his mind like a damning reel of evidence. He had assumed guilt based on bias alone, ignoring the lack of evidence and the boy's protests. His panic deepened as he realized that not only had he been wrong, but he had also acted with cruelty and disregard for justice. The truth had been revealed, and the junior officer could feel the walls closing in around him. Before the junior officer could attempt another fumbling excuse or plea for leniency, the door to the station swung open with force, and the police chief himself strode into the room. His commanding presence instantly silenced the tension-filled space. The senior officer, who had been standing near the wall, straightened his posture, and the junior officer froze in place, his already pale face turning an even starker shade of white. The chief's sharp eyes swept across the room, immediately finding Tyler seated in the interrogation chair. The boy's tear-streaked face, his trembling hands, and his hunched posture told the chief everything he needed to know about the ordeal his son had endured. A wave of fury surged through him, tightening his jaw as he stepped further into the room. He moved directly to Tyler, crouching slightly to look into his son's eyes. His expression softened for a moment, his protective instincts overtaking his initial shock. Tyler blinked up at him, his swollen eyes filled with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. The chief placed a steady hand on Tyler's shoulder, silently reassuring him that he was safe now. But as his attention shifted back to the rest of the room, the chief's demeanor changed. The fury that had simmered beneath the surface erupted as he turned his gaze toward the junior officer, who stood frozen near the table. The chief demanded an explanation, his booming voice reverberating off the walls of the small room. The junior officer flinched at the sound, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form a coherent response. He stammered out a weak apology, his words disjointed and hurried. He claimed that it had all been a mistake, that he hadn't realized who Tyler was, and that his intentions had not been malicious. As the junior officer tried to justify his actions, the chief's anger only deepened. His expression darkened as he interrupted the man's rambling, his voice cutting through the feeble excuses like a blade. He told the junior officer in no uncertain terms that the issue wasn't Tyler's identity. The problem was the officer's blatant racial bias and his appalling treatment of a child. The chief pointed out that the junior officer had ignored all evidence to the contrary, jumping to conclusions based on nothing more than Tyler's skin color. He accused the officer of targeting his son solely because he was black, a damning indictment that left no room for argument. The room grew more tense with each word the chief spoke. The junior officer's attempts to defend himself became increasingly desperate, his voice trembling as he pleaded for leniency. He claimed he had acted in the heat of the moment, but his words rang hollow in the face of the truth. Tyler remained silent during the confrontation, his wide eyes darting between his father and the junior officer. The boy's chest rose and fell rapidly, his emotions a mix of lingering fear and awe at the sight of his father's unwavering defense. As the argument escalated, the junior officer's tone shifted from defensive to outright pleading. He turned to Tyler, his voice trembling as he begged the boy not to tell his father what had happened. But it was far too late for that. The truth was already laid bare, and Tyler's silence only underscored the gravity of the situation. The chief, unmoved by the officer's desperation, declared that his actions were unforgivable. His voice carried a finality that left no doubt about what was coming next. He ordered the junior officer's immediate termination, stating that there was no place in law enforcement for someone who acted with such prejudice and cruelty. The chief didn't stop there. He vowed to ensure that the officer's misconduct would be reported widely, making it impossible for him to find employment in any reputable firm or organization. He emphasized that the officer's actions had not only violated the standards of the department but had also betrayed the fundamental principles of justice and humanity. The disgraced officer stood in stunned silence as the weight of the chief's words settled over him. His earlier arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by a deep sense of dread. He glanced at Tyler, hoping for some sign of mercy, but the boy's tearful gaze remained fixed on the ground. The chief gestured toward the door, signaling for the officer to leave. Moments later, another officer entered the room to escort the man out of the station. The junior officer's head hung low as he shuffled toward the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the silence, each step a reminder of the consequences of his actions. Once the door closed behind the disgraced officer, the chief turned back to Tyler, his expression softening once more as he knelt beside his son. He placed a gentle hand on Tyler's shoulder, speaking to him in a low, reassuring voice. He apologized for what had happened, his tone filled with genuine regret. He told Tyler that no one should ever have to endure what he had experienced and promised that justice would be served. The chief's words brought a small measure of comfort to Tyler, who nodded slowly, his tear-streaked face beginning to relax. The boy's hands, which had been tightly clasped in his lap, loosened slightly as he took a deep breath. For the chief, the sight of his son in such a state was a painful reminder of the work that still needed to be done. He resolved not only to address the immediate situation but also to take steps to prevent such incidents from happening in the future. The ordeal had been harrowing for Tyler, leaving emotional scars that would take time to heal. But as he looked at his father, standing tall and unwavering in his defense, he felt a small glimmer of hope. Justice had been delivered, and for the first time since the incident began, the weight of the injustice he had endured began to lift. The chief stayed with Tyler for a while longer, ensuring the boy felt safe and supported. As they left the station together, the chief's protective arm rested gently on his son's shoulder, a silent promise that he would always stand by him. Don't miss more powerful stories like this on Adam Alpha, where we shine a light on issues of justice and accountability. Disclaimer: this video tells a fictional story intended to highlight issues of injustice and accountability. We stand against all forms of racism, prejudice, and abuse of power. While the events portrayed are not real, they aim to inspire discussions about fairness and respect in our communities. Viewer discretion is advised.